What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 35. I'm Jennie O'Connor, and I help multi-passionate creatives slay imposter syndrome so they can grow their influence and self-promote without feeling slimy. If you are already subscribed, thank you so much. And if you are just tuning in for the first time, please smash that subscribe button because next week I finally get around to a very important episode that has been brewing ever since this podcast began. Time management for people with squirrel syndrome. I think it'll be super helpful to you guys because if I'm an expert at anything, it's systems for getting more done and how they don't work for people like us. So if this sounds like something you can benefit from, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. Today, we are tackling another aspect of living a more courageous life in this, the fifth installment of the Courage series. Full transparency here, you guys. Today's episode is as much a reminder to me as it is intended to be helpful to you. So what we're going to talk about today is finding the courage to speak up when the situation calls for it. I struggle with this every single day. So I'm hoping these tips sink into my brain and take root just as I'm hoping they will for you guys. So obviously the flip side of knowing when to speak up is knowing when to shut up. And that part is a little bit easier for me. I think I'm actually quite a good listener, just not so good at the standing up for myself part. So I think a lot of people don't really know when they should be doing either of these things, or they do know and they're just avoiding it. So let's dig in, shall we? If there is something that you really want to say, chances are there is someone who really needs to hear it. The things that you are not saying are stifling your relationships. But it's super scary, right? That's how I feel. There are so many reasons why it is intimidating to speak our minds. The leadership training company Vital Smarts found that 1 in 4 people have been putting off an important conversation for at least 6 months, and 1 in 10 have kept quiet for 2 years. It's kind of nuts, right? But at the same time, maybe you've been keeping something bottled up for way too long. 6 months is way too long, but 2 years is definitely way too long. So hopefully today is going to change that for you. So let's talk about why it's so scary. For one, speaking your mind puts you at risk for being personally or professionally ostracized, for appearing pushy. You might face rejection or disapproval or confrontation. Like that's a big one for me. I hate confrontation. Another reason it's scary is because we just plain and simply might not get what we want. But notice that I said might. We definitely won't get what we want if we never speak up, right? And way too many of us, myself included, choose the certainty of never resolving an issue because of the possibility that our conversation won't produce the outcome that we want. Think about that. The third reason it's scary is that it might hurt our relationships. So stating what you want might jeopardize the status quo, but when you think about it, what kind of relationship do you want? Like when you fail to speak the truth, you are hiding your true self from the person who's in the relationship with you, which in turn tarnishes the quality of the relationship. If you're not being honest, if you're not showing your true self, and I'm talking about romantic relationships in this particular instance, but if you're not showing your true self to that person, what's the point? That's the one person you should be able to be your true self around. So here are a few reasons why speaking up is critical for finding contentment and for living your most courageous life. As I've explained, not doing so can ruin relationships, but differently than you think. So we're afraid of speaking up because we're worried it might ruin a relationship, but not doing so can also ruin a relationship because often the issues that we don't want to raise are the same ones that ultimately destroy that relationship. And this can apply beyond romantic relationships, familial relationships of any kind, even work situations. What you resist doing persists and probably gets worse over time. Not speaking up can also hold you back from professional success. So if you fear communicating your desire for a promotion, how will anyone you will never ever be forefront of mind to get a promotion. Your managers might not even know that you aspire to move up in the company. Similarly, if you are in a business meeting and you fear putting forward a potentially controversial opinion because you're afraid that others might disagree, or again, it might cause confrontation, you are preventing your managers from seeing what kind of value you add, because always seeing things from other perspectives enhances the overall view. So if you're having a brainstorming session and you're resisting saying certain things because they're controversial or otherwise, like I know it's a problem for a lot of women in particular to speak up in meetings, especially if most of the other people in the room are men. It's sort of a holdover from our conditioning as children that good little girls are quiet, only speak when spoken to. So sometimes it's hard to unlearn that when we get older. And so if you're staying quiet in a meeting, your managers don't realize how valuable you are. And on another hand, if you manage people, you have to give them an opportunity to improve their areas of weakness. Otherwise, the functionality of your team is going to fail. If you don't tell people what needs improvement, you're giving them a false sense of their own ability and their value to the organization. So all reasons why this is so critical. The truth is that when you steel yourself to enter into these courageous but often difficult conversations, you gain all kinds of power. So this is the mind trick that we have to play on ourselves. We're gaining power when we speak our minds. We're gaining the power to resolve issues. We're gaining the power to see things from a heightened perspective. We are gaining the power to generate positive and profound changes in our relationships and in our lives. So, to fully understand the repercussions of not speaking up, you have to make yourself aware of the toll it's taking on your well-being. And that comes back to integrity. That was the topic of the first installment of the Courage series, episode 24. I talk about how integrity is fundamental to being courageous. Integrity essentially is about consistency between what you know is the right thing to do and what you're actually doing. And without integrity, you guys, nothing works. Everything is a disconnect. When your actions and your beliefs don't match, your hair will start to fall out. Trust me on this. It's called cognitive dissonance, when your brain and your actions, your heart are doing different things, and it's so confusing and it creates so much distrust in yourself. And for me, the physical manifestation of that was my hair falling out. So don't do it. Without integrity, you can't enjoy self-respect. That's basically what I was getting at, that self-trust piece. So the goal for all of us, hopefully after listening to this episode, is to be more committed to living with integrity and self-respect than you are to keeping the peace and playing it safe. So I think that's such a good question to ask ourselves. Like, am I honoring myself right now, or am I trying to keep the peace, trying to avoid confrontation? At the end of the day, honoring yourself is the thing you should be doing, right? Another way of looking at this is to understand that silence means consent. So you get what you tolerate. So if this is about not feeling good or feeling taken for granted in certain relationships, that's on you as long as you tolerate it. On the other hand, conversations that are centered on real issues actually provide an opportunity for you to build real trust in your relationship. So I had a boyfriend once upon a time who we had the most interesting conversations where he would drop these like actual terrible bombs on me. Like, if you just let your mind run wild for what the worst thing you could hear from your boyfriend is, that's sometimes what I heard. And I am not going to lie, in the moment, I am a very emotional person, and I hated it. It stung and it was terrible. And in at least one instance, I cried. And I know that for a lot of people, having the person across from them start crying is like the worst nightmare, the worst case scenario. So I know it wasn't easy for him to give me this like bald honesty all the time. But I have to say that once I like could step away and sleep on it or take however much time I needed to, lick my proverbial wounds, that was easily one of the best relationships I've ever had. Maybe even the best in terms of me knowing that I was always getting the truth from that person. It just established this foundation of trust that I have almost never had in another relationship. Even the ones that were still good, but where little white lies were sort of the modus operandi. That relationship stands out in my mind as one of the healthiest because that foundation of truth was there. Okay, that all sounds great, Jenny, but how do I clearly communicate what I want, need, and expect? That's what you're asking, right? All right, let me break it down for you. Step 1 is to ask for what you want from the people that can help you get it. I was always confused about how often when I worked in the service industry, people wanted to shoot the middleman, and we'll get to shooting the middleman later on. If you want something, let's say your meal comes out incorrectly on some level, the thing you're allergic to is in the food is cold, it's the wrong order. While that absolutely can be the server's fault, and you could maybe start there, when you get to the point where you want something compensated or you want I think apologies are kind of dumb because it's lip service, but if there's something you actually need done for you, yelling at the server isn't going to get that thing accomplished. You need to go to the manager. So always, I've heard it say complain up, and I'm not an advocate for complaining at all, but if you have a request or you have something that you need to find the person who has the power to get you what you need. Otherwise, you're wasting your breath and getting more and more angry, potentially. Also remember that if someone says no to your request, it's a rejection of your request. It's not a rejection of you. And that's a big thing. I think that there's such a fear around hearing the word no and assigning it to our self-worth rather than to the simple question that we asked. It's a big piece that a lot of people that I work with struggle with. So just remember, it's just the thing you asked is a no. You aren't a total and complete failure. So step 2, state your worries and your fears up front as you approach this conversation. And I actually took this tip from my therapy sessions. I've seen a therapist for most of my life, truly, like since I was 5, off and on. And sometimes when I had to approach difficult conversations with people like in my family who I know well enough to almost be able to tell you play by play how they're going to react, I know that sometimes what I want to say isn't going to get heard. So, for example, if you're worried that someone is going to feel attacked and then they're going to close their ears to your message and make the conversation about them, you need to lead with that worry at the very beginning of the conversation. So you say something along the lines of this: I have something really important to talk to you about, but I'm really worried that when I tell you this, you are going to feel attacked, and then you're not going to be able to hear what I really need to communicate. Like, there's no blame in that. There's no then you're going to make it all about you. You can leave that part out, and we'll also get to the phrasing of expressing your needs. But it diffuses the situation to say, I'm afraid you're going to do this, because then literally the person will be like, oh, I'm doing that thing, and then they won't do it. So stating your fears and worries up front is critical. It is a golden nugget of usefulness for you in these situations. Step 3, speak from the heart, not from the ego. These two things can't operate in conjunction. So when you are doing one, you cannot be doing the other. So when I say don't speak from the ego, that means resist the urge to prove that you're right. And even if this is a conversation between you and your significant other and you think that you are right, The most important thing to achieve, and you need to tell yourself going into the conversation, is that you want to be heard. You want to state your case so that they hear you and they understand your perspective. Winning isn't the vibe, but winning isn't the thing that you're trying to accomplish. You want to be heard. And don't we all want to be heard? Like, so if you make that the goal, then it sort of decreases the tension level a little bit. So I do this by using the 3 questions. And I think I got this from Wayne Dyer. But I apply this to any sort of difficult scenario in my life. Is what I'm about to say true? Is what I'm about to say necessary? And we're operating under the assumption in today's episode that all of these things that you have inside you that need saying are indeed necessary. And then the last question is what I'm about to say kind? So let's say you're having a breakup conversation. Probably not, doesn't really check the kind box off, but it's necessary and there is a way to do it that sounds kind. So the example I have here is, instead of saying you are a total weenie and I have lost all physical attraction to you whatsoever, you gross, you could instead say, I feel like we're growing in different directions and this relationship is no longer working for me. So there's no gray area there. It's not working for me, leading into we are done here. But that's not placing blame or trying to be right. And it's certainly not kicking the person while they're down. I've lost all physical attraction for you just maybe doesn't need to be said in that conversation, right? So true, kind, and necessary are 3 really good ways to frame what you say so that it can actually be received by the other person without like getting their defenses up. So even in a work relationship, you can see it as like there's a loving way to communicate and there's a fear-based way. So the loving way, it does require courage and humility and integrity. But the fear-based way, which is the one that's all about the ego, will result in fight or flight, because that's what the ego is for, since it wants to win or it wants to save you from losing face. So you instead want to enter the conversation with a spirit of openness and respect, and with a clear goal and an interest in solving the problem at hand. And I think the clear goal in this case is in so many instances, I just want to be heard. I want you to hear where I'm at, what I feel about this situation. So step 4, I am not going to tell you to check your emotions at the door because very few of us can do that. And honestly, I think those that can are probably sociopaths. Sorry, not sorry. But you must go into the conversation with responding rather than reacting at the front of your mind. So reacting is when we're defending something, our values or aspects of our identity that we feel are being threatened in that moment. When this happens, a cycle occurs. So we get triggered, then we get emotional. And when we're emotional, we're in this heightened emotional state, our rational brain kind of shuts off and we start to make assumptions about the other person and their intent. And when we're making assumptions, we're not listening, we're not hearing what's being said. So to respond rather than react, it's really important to separate the facts from your feelings about the facts. So what in this is true and what in this is subjective? All right. So in the same vein, remember that you can't control the emotions and feelings of other people and that it is not your cross to bear how they react if what you're saying is true, kind, and necessary. Like, I know you want to take that on and I know you want to feel guilty about the fact that that person is crying or that they just told you they hate you. But what you said was true, kind, and necessary. And honestly, their reaction is none of your business. It really isn't, because you can't control it. So why would you expend the energy trying? So if the other person starts getting upset, a really good way to respond is to be curious. So to ask super neutral questions that start with how or what. What do you need that you're not getting? How would you improve this situation? Alternatively, you can suggest taking a break, which is also what you should do if you start getting upset. If you notice that your emotional quotient is rising, and that means that your rational quotient is dropping, you can also suggest stepping away until everybody's had a chance to think it over and calm down a little bit. Sometimes that is the most courageous thing. It's more courageous to walk away than to stay and fight most of the time. So step 5, this one's really, really hard, especially if you're a people pleaser. You have to let go of likability. So when we receive bad news, we shoot the messenger, like I stated in the example above. The other person who's listening to what you have to say will likely want to assign blame. But you cannot, I repeat, you cannot take it personally. You have to focus on the end goal of your conversation. You can't control the emotions and the feelings of others and their reaction and their opinion of you in the heat of the moment. Like I said, none of your business. That's not on you. So don't make it your business. And look for evidence of times when someone has gotten upset and then and said stuff they didn't mean, and then come back later and been like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean any of those things. So even a lack of likability in that moment isn't necessarily a true read on that person's feelings for you in the long term. But ultimately, you can't concern yourself with it. Not if you want to have courageous, difficult conversations and make your life better. Step 6, avoid criticizing. And this is kind of obvious, but at the same time, it's also difficult if you are, for example, in a management position and you need to have a conversation. This is like a work review with one of your employees. But we all learned in elementary school what constructive criticism is. And so you can couch a critique in a compliment. So if that's the scenario that you are in, where you need to improve someone's work performance and you're in a position to do that, you couch a critique in a compliment. But if this is a romantic conversation that you're having, avoid criticizing as much as you possibly can. Try to take that out of the equation completely, because again, when they get their defenses up, their emotions rise and their rationality decreases. Step 7, don't generalize. Nobody benefits from generalization. So you always do this, or you never do this, or nobody gives me any credit around here. All of those, for starters, those statements aren't true. And they're just a really good way to get the other person to turn off, like earmuffs. I'm not listening to you because what you're saying is crazy. So just don't generalize. Step 8, use I statements. So I am feeling angry or frustrated or misunderstood, rather than you make me feel. And this has been a really tricky one for me to remember to use, because I can get fired up and I can say, you make me, but that's not right. You don't make me feel anything. I just happen to feel this way. And that's what I want to communicate to you. It's just a tiny shift in the way you phrase it. Step 9, shut the fuck up. This is such a good one, you guys. Shut the fuck up. Even when there is silence, don't fill it in. This is a really hard thing. I don't know if you guys have done a lot of Zoom calls. I think in the, COVID era, we all got sort of used to that as our biggest mode of communication. It's so interesting to me how important silence is, so that you don't end up talking over each other, because when you do, you can't hear what's being said at all. But it is so contrary to our nature. I used to think that if someone was quiet, they needed help finishing their sentence, so I should just finish it for them. I should just paraphrase what they're saying, because clearly they're struggling. But I've also come to witness people who are very, very good at this particular tactic can get so much more out of the person who they're talking to. It's like they're just slowly pulling more information. If you just let it lie. I believe it's even a key strategy in negotiation is to be quiet, because the other person will fill the silence, because they're also uncomfortable, and they will sort of give away their power position. So in every instance, shut the fuck up. So don't fill in the silence. And if it's hard for you to do this, focus on conscious breathing. So just be aware of the breath coming in and the breath going out. You can count the breaths if you want to. You can use, if you're a yogi, you can use ujjayi breathing, which is a breath that has a sound. It's an audible whisper almost. It sounds like waves or the wind in the trees. But do everything you can to close your mouth and keep it closed. This is why this is important. Anything you say after you drop the bomb, whatever that is in this instance, will very likely be forgotten because they're processing, and maybe even they got their defenses up. And when they got their defenses up, they closed their ears and they stopped listening. So say everything important up front and drop the bomb, and then you have to be quiet because you're just wasting your energy and your breath after that. Also, no matter how they act, just listen. That diffuses the tension in a situation. They're reacting. They're kind of freaking out. Their emotions are getting elevated, and you are just calmly listening. And when I say listening, I mean really listening, rather than reloading your verbal guns for your next shot. Guilty, right? You're hearing that and you're like, I'm guilty. I do that, because we all do that. Really listen. Genuine listening enhances trust and facilitates them listening to you when it's your turn. Maybe, hopefully, but it certainly does more of that than not listening. So think of it as listening with the intent to understand, really grasp what they're going through so that you can empathize with it rather than to reply. Like sometimes something will come up and I'll be like, ooh, I have to mention that. Ooh, I have to mention that. And it's so tempting to interrupt, but listen to understand. Listen so that you can put yourself in their shoes more easily. So a really great way to put this into practice is to parrot back what they're saying to you. So if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is blah, 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 blah. It's a very good method. And then last but not least, see if you can hear what isn't being said. Sometimes there's something that they want you to know, but that they aren't comfortable sharing. And if you feel like this might be happening, if you have a hunch about something, share it. Say, I know you say that you don't care, but I get the feeling that you would be upset if I didn't ask your opinion before doing X, Y, or Z. So if this resonates for you and you think there are some instances in your life where you could speak your truth and you maybe have been avoiding doing so, here is an exercise. So take your journal and write down in it any situations that you currently face that cause you to feel any of the following things: unappreciated, disrespected, resentful, misunderstood, manipulated, coerced into doing things you don't want to do, abused physically or emotionally, or diminished as if your opinions and feelings don't matter that much. So write every instance in your life that makes you feel any of those things. And then now, with your list in front of you, repeat aloud these 2 affirmations. I take full responsibility for allowing myself to be treated as I have been. From today forward, I will take responsibility for speaking up so that I am not treated this way in the future. It's good, right? So if you want the Courage Series downloadable workbook that includes this exercise and exercises from all 5 episodes in a printable PDF that you can grab and then work through the journal exercises at your leisure, you can get that at jennyo'connor.com/courage. So on that note, I want to close today's episode with a quote from Winston Churchill. Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. And that is the truth, y'all. So thank you so much for tuning in today. If you found this content valuable enough to warrant a tip, you can show your appreciation by visiting buymeacoffee.com/Jennie O'Connor. Or you can support the show by rating and reviewing. But if you do, listen up. If you do that, be sure to take a screenshot of your review and post it to your stories and tag me at Your Creative Fairy Godmother. That way, you will be entered into my giveaway for the best book ever on how to slay imposter syndrome, The Middle Finger Project by the inimitable and ever so sassy Ash Amberjay. The contest runs until December 31st, and trust me when I tell you, this book will change your life. I'm not kidding, you guys. It is amazing, and it changed mine. And speaking of changing your life, my goal is to help creative people like you step into the spotlight and make real money from their art. I have created a ton of free resources to help you out with this. One of these is my procrastination personality quiz, which will teach you why you procrastinate and what action steps you can take to stop it for good. You can find that at jennyo'connor.com/procrastination. Until next time, you guys are amazing and I love your faces. Now get on out there and do the thing. Bye-bye.